You've said that there are obscene levels of child poverty in the UK. Just how bad is the situation?
We've got probably the highest levels of poverty in living memory amongst children. And these figures have risen dramatically over the last few years. So we've now got 4.3 million children who are officially in poverty. 3 million children will be missing meals at some point during the course of this month. 1 million children last night and tonight will be sleeping without a bed of their own. This is a level of destitution for some families that we haven't seen for many, many years. You know, I grew up in a mining and textile town. We saw a great deal of poverty when I was growing up, and we're back to these kind of levels. And it really is something that demands urgent attention. Children ill-clad and hungry, families having to choose between heating, eating and keeping clean, mothers ashamed because they're having to queue up at food banks to get food for their children to make ends meet. These are all the things that are now happening that should not be happening. As the Trussell Trust has reported today, saying that they have had to give out 3 million food parcels in the last year, it should not be happening in 2024.
You know, you're someone who's very instilled in your community, in Fife, and it does really hit me, when you say that you're seeing poverty now that you didn't see or you only saw many years before. What kind of things are you witnessing then now?
Well, we're running a multi-bank, which is a food bank, clothes bank, furnishings bank, toiletries bank, baby bank, all rolled into one. And so last winter, people were desperate for bedding just to keep warm. They'd stopped heating their homes and they were simply trying to heat themselves. As we move into these summer months, toiletries, people cannot afford or consider soap and shampoo and toothpaste as a luxury item. And that's why the biggest hospital admissions for children under 10, between 5 and 9, is for dental decay. And that's 3.5 times higher in the poorer communities than in the richer communities. So we're seeing austerity's children. These are the children born in the last 15 years, children who are growing up poor, who've probably never known what it is to be anything other than poor. And they don't have the clothes, they don't have the shelter that is of high quality, and they don't get the nutrition that they need. And we have to do something about it. It is the biggest social problem we face. It is dividing our society, and it's going to get worse because the government has, in the last few weeks, given up on all the emergency help it was giving for heating. It's going to abolish the household support fund, which is the last line of defence against destitution. And we have charities now advertising for help because they anticipate summer hunger for children who are out of school without school meals and nothing in the lunchtime break. These are the kind of problems we're dealing with, and these are the problems that I do think any government minister, if they came around the country, if they actually visited communities, and we're talking about Wales, Scotland, the North East, the North West, the Midlands, and many parts of London and the South, they would see that these are real problems facing families who just cannot make ends meet. And most of them are people who are in jobs. 70% of children in poverty are in families where someone is working. So it's a problem of low pay as well as a problem of poor benefits.
You speak, very movingly of these children who don't have a bed, who don't even have toothpaste, things that you and I would just take completely for granted. What specifically are you calling for? What needs to happen?
Well, I'm talking about the September financial statement that I believe Jeremy Hunt is going to make, and it's only really a few weeks until then. And I'm suggesting, first of all, that the banks in Europe, the Swiss bank and the European Central Bank, they require the commercial banks to hold assets at their banks and don't pay interest on them. We pay interest. That's not necessary for a fraction of the reserves that are held at the central bank. That could raise between 1 and 2 billion. The Household Support Fund, which is £500 million, should be continued, not abolished, and many charities are calling for that. At the same time, I do think that a children's fund should be created, and it could be with foundations and charities as well as businesses and local and national government. But we need to revive projects like Sure Start, because we proved that until 2010, Sure Start was actually increasing educational performance, reducing demand for healthcare, was actually paying for itself and was actually cost effective. So all the things I'm proposing can be achieved within the fiscal rules that both political parties have set down.
Of course, there's been a lot of scrutiny about the 2-child limit. So that many people believe, many studies suggest, has forced larger families into poverty, so children into poverty. I mean, even Suella Braverman has come out to say that she thinks that 2-child limit should be scrapped. Keir Starmer hasn't. Is he, now to the right of Suella Braverman?
What I think is needed is a root and branch review, because it's not just the 2-child rule, it's the bedroom tax, it's also the benefit caps, it's the housing benefit limit.
You think that Keir Starmer should commit to scrapping the 2-child limit?
I think yes. I think they should do a review, a root and branch review of universal credit, and you've got to look at every aspect of universal credit which has gone wrong. And it's not, of course, just the 2-child rule that is causing problems. It's the caps that have been placed on, for example, housing benefit. And it's the deductions that are taking place. If you go onto universal credit, you don't get any benefit for 5 weeks. Therefore, you've got to take out a loan. Therefore, half the people on universal credit are now paying back loans that they took out because they didn't have any benefit under the system's rules. And that means the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, it's now the biggest debt collector in the country. And some people are having 25% of their benefit cut every week, some people 30% actually, and that means they're forced further and further into poverty. So all these rules have got to be looked at. And let's just remember that the majority of families we're talking about are people in work. This is not the work shy or the indolent that are featured in the article today by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. They've got to focus on where the majority of the child poor are, and they're in working families. On the 2-child rule, for example, 60% of the people who are hit by the 2-child rule are working families. They're not families where someone is not working at all. They're families where people just cannot make ends meet. Now, if you're on the 2-child rule, you're probably losing about £60 a week, but it's affecting every child in the household, not just the 3rd or 4th child. It's affecting the 1st and 2nd child as well, and it's reducing people to a level of poverty that we should not see. And I tell you, this is getting worse this year because of the changes that have been made by withdrawing emergency help and the prospective decline or collapse of the Household Support Fund.
Can I just ask you about Rwanda? Because today Sky's had access to asylum seekers in the United Kingdom who are saying if they'd known about the Rwanda scheme, they wouldn't have come, which suggests it could perhaps be working as a deterrent. If there is evidence that Rwanda acts as a deterrent, do you think there's an argument to keep it?
Sophie, I'm not going to be a backseat driver for the policy of either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party at the moment. I'm focused on child poverty, and I'm focused on what needs to be done urgently to deal with it. So if you'll forgive me, I'll leave the questions about Rwanda and about asylum seekers to those who are dealing with them in the House of Commons at the moment. I'm out of Westminster politics. I want to talk about what's happening here and now. I am shocked and ashamed by the amount of poverty I'm seeing in this country, and that's what I'm going to focus my energies on, both in the charitable work that I'm hoping lots of businesses and other people can join in, but also in trying to alert the political system that you cannot ignore the future of millions of children in our country without terrible consequences for the future. Thatcher's children, we talked about, educational underachievement in the mining areas when there was the collapse of the pits and people saw their aspirations crushed. We're seeing the same thing again. These are austerity's children. That's what I'm going to talk about.
I think a lot of people would probably, respect you for doing that and for sticking to your guns when it comes to talking about child poverty. I am going to slip in one very cheeky question at the end, if I may, but you can dodge this one, don't worry, because we may be having the first Labour Prime Minister since yourself. And I know I'm going to ask this question very carefully because I know you don't want to be a backseat driver. But what would be your advice to any, incoming Prime Minister? It could be, policy. It could be about nicking the number 11 flat because it's bigger. What would your bit of advice be?
Well, to stick to his principles. And Keir Starmer, I know, as a very talented but also very principled person. And I do think that the pressures of politics are such that you have to deal with problems every day that you never anticipated, but you must never lose sight of why you're there in the first place. And if you do lose sight of that, then you will fail. If you don't lose sight of it and commit to your principles and implementing them, then I think he'll succeed, and I'm sure he will.